It is 0641 a.m. local time near the Altai mountain ridge, a stretch of air no one officially owns and everyone quietly watches. Two Russian Mi-28N gunships lift from a temporary forward base, blades carving the cold air into concentric thunder. The mission brief calls it a terrain mapping exercise. In truth, it's a probing flight, a test of how far they can edge into the invisible border before someone notices. The flight path threads between valleys, radar off, optics on, using ground clutter to mask their movement. At 40 kilometers in, the lead pilot, callsign Buren, checks his onboard passive receiver. The electromagnetic spectrum looks clean. No early warning radars, no telemetry bursts. It's too clean. In this part of the world, silence means someone else is listening. The Mi-28's onboard ELINT suite logs ambient noise at 92 decibels. That's baseline. Then a 1 decibel rise, then another. To human ears, nothing. To the helicopter's digital brain, a whisper from the horizon. Buran doesn't see the Z-10s yet. They're climbing in from the southeast, transponders off, flying beneath the same thermal inversion layer that hides the Russians. Their formation spacing is perfect, 70 meters lateral, 10 vertical. Every 5 seconds, the lead Z-10 shifts yaw 3 degrees, creating micro-distortions in its own radar profile. To anyone scanning, it looks like weather interference. At 6,000 meters above, a Y-9 intelligence aircraft is watching everything. Its synthetic aperture radar paints the valley in strips, collecting positional data at 2-meter resolution. The operators aboard mark 2 faint heat signatures. Temperature delta plus 12 degrees over ambient. Targets confirmed. Russian Mi-28s. A data burst travels to the Z-10 flight at 32 kilobits per second. Encoded, compressed, untraceable. The Chinese pilots received the message without a sound. Buren's wingman, callsign Vega, spots movement on the terrain display. A flicker at 60 kilometers. He reports possible echo return. The radar officer back at ground command cross-checks satellite tracks, sees nothing. Continue mission, the order comes, clipped, confident. But the invisible chessboard is already in play. At 0647, both Mi-28s cross the ridgeline. Wind speed 42 knots. Turbulence mild. To the west, sunlight bleeds across the horizon like an approaching searchlight. The Russian crews believe they are unseen. They are wrong. From 60 kilometers away, the Z-10s are already painting them optically. No radar, no emissions, just digital eyes locked on pixel variance and exhaust shimmer. In 9 minutes, Russia will learn what electronic silence really sounds like. It is 0648 a.m., and the Z-10s are already in position. 4 aircraft, altitude 800 meters, closing from the southeast vector with perfect synchronization. Their radar remains off, but their electro-optical sensors hum with silent precision. Each Z-10 carries a Type 410 electronic warfare pod under its left stub wing, the same model designed for pinpoint emissions tracking within a half-degree arc. Its algorithms don't hunt for signals. They wait for inconsistencies in atmospheric reflection, the faint ghost of digital leakage that even stealth systems exhale when active processors switch states. Inside Buren's cockpit, the Mi-28's diagnostics flicker once, a 2-millisecond spike in the radar altimeter feed. He ignores it. Static discharge, he thinks. But Vega notices the same anomaly on his console 30 meters away. 2 identical events, separated by geography, synchronized to the same timestamp. Coincidence in combat doesn't exist. The Z-10 leader, callsign Hai Lang, watches his screen. A heat map of signal strength blooms in soft orange and red. The Mi-28s are breathing digitally. Bursts of telemetry, encrypted handshake pings, routine system checks. Each one a fingerprint. The Chinese EW suite records everything at 32 gigabytes per second. No attack yet. Just observation. At 64 kilometers, Hai Lang's wingman triggers passive triangulation. The formation fans out by 70 meters. Their onboard processors cross-correlate data streams, matching signal angles to within 1/10 of a degree. In the command center back at Korla, analysts watch the reconstruction in real time. The Russian rotor signatures appear first. 9-blade interference pattern, frequency 18.2 Hz, distinctive of Mi-28 gear ratios. Then, something unexpected. Frequency hopping in the communications band, irregular, defensive. The Russians have detected the watchers. Buran doesn't see them, but he feels it. The vibration of the Mi-28 changes pitch as the EW interference brushes the avionics. It's like flying through invisible static. He toggles to secure Channel Bravo, an encrypted narrow-band frequency reserved for emergencies. The instant he does, the interference spikes. Channel Bravo is precisely what the Chinese were waiting for. A high-value frequency containing authentication patterns, command encryption keys, and transmission error behavior. Every packet captured. Vega reports minor lag in flight control feedback. Delay 0.4 seconds. That's enough to turn precision into danger. Buran orders a systems check, unaware that every command is now mirrored and recorded in the Z-10's onboard memory. Hai Lang holds fire. No missile locks, no radar sweeps, just patience. One wrong Russian keystroke, one desperate countermeasure, and the entire avionics architecture reveals itself. At 0650, the Z-10s dive 200 meters lower, sliding into the blind zone below the Russian radar horizon. The trap is closing, silently. One maneuver, one data burst, and every secret the Mi-28 carries will soon belong to someone else. It is 0651 a.m. when the first electronic ping arrives. Not a shout, but a precise surgical tap, like a doctor testing reflexes. The Mi-28 sensor bus records a transient, 15 microseconds of unexpected carrier energy on a mid-band channel, then silence. The flight engineer calls it a blip. The onboard computer logs it as an interrupt. The cockpit lights flicker. For 0.8 of a second, the primary warning array goes dark. Not a full failure, but a staged blackout that scrambles human rhythm. Instruments blink out of sequence, then return. The pilots feel the gap as a lurch in time. Buran's hand freezes over the cyclic. He tastes metal in his mouth. Vega exhales involuntarily, a noise caught by the cockpit camera, and by nothing else. In the back, the mission specialist mutters a diagnostics query that never leaves his throat because his headset scrambles to static for a heartbeat and then snaps back. The display shows nothing obvious to the naked eye. No missile trail, no flare, no external illumination. But the log file will show microsecond-level anomalies, signatures that the Z-10s wanted recorded. At Korla, Hai Lang watches a timing graph blossom. The ping was deliberate, a calibrated probe to force a software handshake. Think of it like knocking on a locked door and waiting to see which light turns on inside. The Z-10's pod doesn't shout its presence. It toys with the Mi-28's reflexes, watching which circuits twitch, which error handlers run, and how the avionics prioritize. The Chinese pod timestamp stamps every reaction. Sensor latency, bus contention, interrupt vectors, exception dumps. Within a second, A human analyst in the EW lab calls out an event code, and the system begins opportunistic harvesting. Buran thinks they've suffered a glitch. He runs the standard checklist: reinitialize bus 1, cycle the navigation array, switch to a backup power rail. Each step produces a new breadcrumb. The Z-10s are listening for those breadcrumbs. Vega, trying to steady his voice, reports the power transient. His wording, clipped, clinical, reveals the cadence of their automation routines. Bus 1 reset, nav reacquiring, standby online. Those are the exact phrases the Z-10s will replay later, matched against timing jitter to isolate processor cycle, counts and buffer overflows. A single microsecond difference in handling an interrupt exposes firmware behavior. A single logged line shows which version of middleware is running. Hailang's algorithm parses the trace and identifies a likely OS kernel fingerprint within 8 seconds. The Chinese EW suite extrapolates probable upgrade paths and defensive patches. They do not need to shoot. They need only observe. Vega tries a countermeasure. A short encrypted handshake burst on an alternate channel, the kind of defensive reflex programmed into every Russian gunship. The moment it transmits, the Z-10's pod moves from passive capture to active characterization. The pod sweeps a narrowband probe across the transmitted spectrum, measuring phase noise, sideband distortion, and envelope shaping. In plain terms, it watches how the Russian radios speak and learns their accent. Back in the Mi-28, the autopilot hiccups for a half-second. The flight computer reroutes control loops through an auxiliary processor, and the collective drops a few millimeters. The pilots notice the micro-oscillation, but not yet its cause. To them, this is a maintenance headache. To the watchers, it's a fingerprint. Hailang holds formation and logs another gigabyte of data. No launch, no flare, no escalation beyond the baseline. The Z-10s flick their cameras and record the pilots' faces as they flinch, the way their tongues press against teeth during a forced checklist. One wrong move, and China will have a 70-page map of Mi-28 responses. Timing, protocol, failure modes. One wrong move, and the Mi-28's defenses become a datasheet. Buran tells himself to breathe. He orders a power reconfiguration. The sort of conservative decision meant to buy time. The decision is audible on the radio, a clean, human syllable wrapped in authority. It is exactly what Hailang expected. The pod captures the command waveform and the audio signature of the microphone preamp. Later, analysts will reverse engineer the mic model from its harmonic distortion. The Mi-28 survives the tap. No one is shot down. There is no explosion, no dramatic chaff cloud. But the aircraft have been probed, fingerprinted, and catalogued. In 9 minutes of engagement like this, the Z-10s will turn hesitation into data, and data into leverage. The lesson is already beginning. It will last only 9 minutes, but the print it leaves will endure. It is 06:52 a.m. The air between the two formations is now a chessboard of invisible frequencies. The Mi-28s cut across the ridgeline, rotor wash scattering snow into vapor trails that glint under the rising sun. The Z-10s remain 43 kilometers east, maintaining absolute radio silence. They no longer need radar. Every ripple of electromagnetic noise from the Russian helicopters gives away their position, vector, and operational mode. Inside Buran's cockpit, a soft tone repeats twice, then stops. The system diagnostic reads "COM relay delay." It means nothing to him yet. But to the Chinese observers, that delay is a perfect time marker. The Z-10s synchronize all 4 aircraft clocks to it, aligning data capture within a microsecond window. From now on, Every Russian control input is mirrored on Chinese screens 300 kilometers away. Vega requests a routine uplink to ground command. The moment he presses transmit, the Mi-28's signal bloom spikes across 6 channels. The Z-10's EW pod opens its virtual aperture, taking a full spectral snapshot. Modulation scheme, power envelope, intermodulation distortion. In that single burst, the Russians have unknowingly transmitted the DNA of their encrypted network. Hailang orders a split formation. 2 Z-10s climb to 1,200 meters, extending sensor coverage. The other pair holds low, masking against the terrain. The upper pair's optical systems switch to hyperspectral mode, capturing thermal gradients from the rotor disks. Each blade tip leaves a distinct ionization signature. Traceable, indexable, unique. The system tags the pattern as Target Alpha 2 and locks it into a growing library. The Russians still see nothing. Buran tightens formation, drops altitude to 200 meters to reduce radar exposure. But it doesn't help against optics or passive sensors. His flight path traces perfectly on the Z-10 command console. A dotted line of precision, rendered in false color. Then the Mi-28's data bus begins to fragment. Not catastrophic, just latency shifts, 1 millisecond at a time. Engine telemetry freezes, then resumes. The navigation cursor drifts half a degree west before snapping back. These are not attacks, only reflections. The Chinese pod is running what analysts later call mirror sampling. It pings the electromagnetic environment at infinitesimal power, letting the target's own systems echo the ping back through their shielding. In that echo lives structure, circuit layout, wire length, interference harmonics, enough to reconstruct internal architecture without ever breaching the hull. Vega curses as his targeting screen momentarily blanks. He toggles back up, switches power rails. Each corrective action provides more data. The Z-10 pod records not only the signal, but the human pattern. Timing between voice command and system input. Reaction delay. 1.4 seconds under stress. It's a small number, but patterns like that make future jamming predictable. At 0653, Hailang issues his first real maneuver order. We move now. The Z-10's bank left in perfect symmetry, dropping altitude by 90 meters to ride a thermal draft. On the Russian side, the Mi-28 sensors detect a faint phase shift. Electromagnetic shadow at the edge of their radar horizon. Buran snaps the radar on for a single sweep. 1 rotation, 0.7 seconds. That's all the Z-10s need. The Chinese pods record the entire radar emission sequence. Waveform, pulse repetition interval, beam width, frequency hop pattern. It is the crown jewel of the Mi-28's defensive suite, laid bare in less than a second. Hailang cuts power to his EW pod, returning to silence. To any listener, the valley is calm again. But somewhere in a server farm, 2 provinces away, terabytes of signal fingerprints are already compiling. The Z-10's bank north, invisible once more. For the Russians, the horizon still looks empty. But something in the air feels wrong. A static whisper over the intercom, a tremor in the instruments. They don't know it yet, but every flicker, every adjustment, every pulse has been copied. One maneuver, and all their secrets are exposed. It is 0654 a.m. when the Mi-28s reach the midpoint of their patrol route. The terrain below turns from ridged rock to a flat valley floor. Perfect radar country. Except no radar is painting them. The Russian crews believe the silence means safety. It doesn't. It means the Z-10s have entered full electronic ghost mode. Hailang's lead helicopter drifts 200 meters above the rest of the formation. Its EW pod emits a narrow phase-shifted signal, 1/10 the power of a cell phone. The pulse isn't meant to jam, it's meant to resonate. When it hits the Mi-28's fuselage, certain frequencies bounce differently depending on wiring paths inside. The return echo tells the pod how the Russian aircraft is built, like reading the grain of wood by tapping it with a fingernail. Inside Buran's cockpit, the navigation map hesitates. The GPS overlay flickers, swaps coordinate fonts for half a second, then stabilizes. He assumes a software lag. Vega sees the same glitch, only his clock has jumped forward by 1 full second. Two identical systems, desynchronized. In electronic warfare, that's the first sign of intrusion. Hailang watches the telemetry unfold. Each Russian correction, altitude trim, yaw adjust, throttle nudge, creates digital ripples. The Chinese processor aligns these ripples into a behavioral model, calculating how the Mi-28's control computer distributes load between its redundant channels. The discovery is worth more than any downed helicopter. It's a map of Russian avionics logic. The Russian ground controller at Rubinsk base tries to raise Buran on the secure link. The transmission travels 1,200 kilometers through a satellite relay, but halfway across, packet integrity drops below 90%. The Chinese EW pod isn't blocking it. It's reflecting tiny fractions of the signal back into space, forcing automatic retransmissions. Each retry adds delay. The message that should take 2 seconds takes 7. When the call finally reaches Buran, he hears only, "Maintain current," followed by static. He confirms, not realizing the order was, "Maintain current heading and altitude." The missing half of a sentence alters the mission profile. The Mi-28s climb slightly, putting them into the optical line of sight of the upper Z-10s. Through infrared cameras, the Russian helicopters glow like embers. Exhaust plumes trail behind them, temperature differential 90 degrees over ambient. The sensors aboard Hailang's craft dissect the image frame by frame. Each engine's thermal rhythm is distinct. One exhaust nozzle vibrating at 72 Hz, the other at 68. That asymmetry gives away mechanical wear, rotor torque calibration, and even fuel mix ratio. Buran glances at his warning console. A single line appears. EW anomaly detected. It's a generic alert, triggered by too much low-band noise in the spectrum analyzer. He taps the display twice and clears it. The moment he does, the Z-10's processor notes the timing, human reaction delay 1.2 seconds, and logs it alongside the aircraft ID. The Russians still think they're alone in clean air. But above them, the Z-10s record the data stream in crystalline detail, every heartbeat of radio static translated into parameters. The Mi-28's defensive suite, designed for battle, is now performing on stage, unaware that the audience is copying every line of its code. The Chinese pilots never cross the line, never trigger radar, never open fire. They just listen. Every byte collected becomes a future countermeasure. The lesson continues. Minute 5 of 9. It is 06:55 a.m., and the choreography tightens. The Mi-28s have reached the valley center. A bowl of glass-clear air, where sound travels true and sensors betray every motion. Buran realizes the pattern now. Probes, echoes, timed delays. He snaps a decision. Hard bank. Aggressive descent to treetop level. A classic anti-detection profile meant to confuse line-of-sight trackers and throw off triangulation. It is exactly the kind of physical maneuver the Mi-28 was built to execute. The Z-10s react instantly. Hailang tilts his formation into the new vector, folding data streams and rewriting intercept geometry in real time. The upper pair peels away and pours hyperspectral focus onto the descending Mi-28s, while the low pair skims the ridge, keeping passive apertures trained. No missiles, no weapons. The Z-10s do not need to fire to win this engagement. They close the net with optics and math. One maneuver, and all secrets were exposed. Buran orders flare pods and chaff, a reflex drilled in at the academy. A cascade of aluminum and magnesium blossoms into the air. Tactile, bright, pretty. The Mi-28's countermeasures are textbook perfect. They should buy a window, a chance to slip away. Instead, the ejecta gives the Chinese systems more to read. The pod's cameras capture plume dispersion, fragment scattering angles, aerosol reflectivity. From the way chaff behaves, analysts deduce dispenser timing, ejection impulse, and the precise orientation of the release actuator. The Mi-28 wasn't ready for this level of EW combat. Its defensive choreography becomes, in the viewer's hands, a diagnostic report. Vega fights the collective to stabilize climb rate. The autopilot complains, reroutes control loops through a tertiary bus. That tertiary bus has an error handling routine with a signature cadence. Hailang's console highlights it in violet. Likely a legacy patch from a known Russian avionics vendor. The Chinese feed the trace into a pattern-matching engine, and the system returns a confidence score. 97% match, Subsystem X running firmware version Y. On the ground at Korla, an EW analyst whispers into his headset, but he does not shout victory. Such things are catalogued, not celebrated. China didn't fire. It just collected priceless data. The lab's RAID array burns as terabytes spool. Waveform captures, audio snippets, thermal frames, and the minute-by-minute log of human inputs. Every keystroke Buran makes, every clipped phrase Vega breathes into the mic, is preserved. The encounter will be reconstructed later in slow motion, frame by frame, and each frame will be interrogated. Back in the Mi-28, Buran orders an emergency climb to break line of sight, a maneuver intended to scramble optical tracking. The aircraft responds, but its health monitors flash a message. Hydraulic temp rise, left actuator trending high. The crew has no time to diagnose. In the corner of the screen, a small maintenance flag blinks. Maintenance code 4F12. Something only ground technicians understand. That code flickers into the EW capture stream. Analysts in Korla write it down. Every defensive trick the Russian crews attempt becomes a surrendered secret. Decoy bursts, frequency hops, power cycling. Each is a data point in a map that the Z-10s are drawing in real time. The Chinese pod does not need to break the Mi-28 to win. It only needs to read it like an open book. As the helicopters claw for altitude, a peripheral alarm chimes in Buran's ear. Link A. Integrity degraded. He slams the interface to reroute telemetry to a backup satellite mesh. The mesh takes 2 seconds to re-authenticate. A lifetime. During those 2 seconds, the Z-10s capture the re-authentication handshake and immediately replay it through a matching algorithm. From that handshake, they infer token refresh intervals and probable entropy sources. In plain terms, they learn how often Russian networks rotate their keys and how those keys are generated. The lesson accumulates in digital ink. The Z-10 reacted instantly. The lesson lasted only 9 minutes. By the time the Mi-28s clear the valley edge and climb toward the safety of friendly airspace, nothing has been fired and everything has been lost. The crew feels relief. The analysts feel completion. One wrong move, one tactical reflex, and China recorded everything in digital detail. Far below, a command post lights up as reports stream in. In Moscow, the first flagged items reach an operations desk. Unusual latency patterns, specific firmware fingerprints, a string of maintenance codes. Officials will argue about deniability and rules of engagement. Engineers will not argue. To them, the log is a map, and the map is the hardest kind of truth. The helicopters hum away, their rotors slicing air that now carries a different weight. A quiet, recorded exposure. The Mi-28s return to base intact, but altered. Somewhere in a climate-controlled hall, a technician in Korla writes the encounter number into a ledger. Encounter 21B neutral. The record will not end in the valley. It will seed new countermeasures, new tactics, and a reordering of assumptions. The Mi-28 wasn't ready for this level of EW combat, and China did not have to fire to prove it. It is 06:56 a.m. The valley falls away behind them like a closing door. Buran steadies the Mi-28's nose at 300 meters altitude, pushing east toward neutral air. The cockpit smells of burnt electronics and hydraulic fluid. Nothing is broken, but everything feels fragile. Vega wipes condensation off his display with his glove. The static has stopped. The silence feels worse. In the Korla Command Center, analysts watch the Russian icons retreat. The stream continues. No jamming, no interference. They're recording the tail signatures now, the way the radar altimeter fades as power drains from the Mi-28's auxiliary bus. To the untrained eye, the trace is meaningless. To the team, it's a blueprint of vulnerability, a soft seam where a future pulse could blind navigation completely. Hailang's formation doesn't pursue. Instead, it arcs west, staying just outside the Russian radar horizon, maintaining visual lock through infrared and low-light optical systems. The Z-10s glide in silence, the rhythm of their rotors lost in mountain wind. The Chinese pilots speak only in code words: Echo 1, Mirror 2, each a signal for data tagging. Every second of the encounter is being written to hardened drives under their seats. Inside the Mi-28, Buran checks the mission clock. 9 minutes elapsed since takeoff. 9 minutes of nothing that now feels like everything. He radios command for a systems diagnostic upload. The return link crackles. Stand by. Telemetry corrupted. The data stream he's sending home is unreadable, scrambled by echo noise that the Mi-28's computers cannot explain. In the interference, the EW signature of the Z-10s hides like a fingerprint in glass. Vega looks out the side window. The sky is clear. Too clear. "We're out of their envelope," he says. Buran nods, but his eyes stay on the console. The artificial horizon wobbles half a degree, corrects itself, wobbles again. Gyro drift. He taps the panel, and the movement stops. In the log files, that tap registers as a voltage spike in the flight control bus. On the other side of the border, the same spike appears on Hailang's telemetry. The systems are still talking, unintentionally, invisibly. At Korla, a technician overlays 2 time graphs: Mi-28 control events and Z-10 receiver logs. The peaks align within 2 microseconds. The analyst grins quietly. Synchronization complete. They can now model the Russian feedback loops with surgical accuracy. It's as if they're flying the Mi-28 themselves, inside its nervous system. Buran doesn't know it yet, but his helicopter's entire personality, its reaction time, latency thresholds, power prioritization order, has been digitized. The Z-10s have mapped how the machine thinks. The Chinese pilots stay on the outer edge of engagement, never crossing the invisible line. Their instruments hum softly, collecting final traces before breaking off. Hailang calls it over the intercom. Data lock confirmed. The phrase is short, procedural, and carries the satisfaction of an entire operation executed flawlessly without a single shot. At 06:57, The Z-10s peel away, banking north toward home. The Mi-28s continue east, unaware that their shadows are no longer their own. For Buren, it's just another quiet morning exercise that went a little strange. For the engineers who will study the data later, it's a revolution in electronic warfare. From the Russian perspective, nothing happened. From the Chinese perspective, everything did. It is 06:58 a.m. when the Mi-28s attempt something that has never been practiced in the theater's playbook. An active deception, not just evasive flying. Buren radios a terse command, an improvised spoof routine, a layered handshake meant to look like a system fault and trigger a defensive fallback. The idea is to make the observers think the helicopter is dying, to force them to reveal whether they are passive or active. It is a gambler's move, a bluff across the empty sky. Vega initiates the sequence. His fingers move with practiced speed, initiating a chained transmission that cycles authentication tokens and toggles redundant radios. The cockpit hums. For a moment, the architecture of the Mi-28 flexes like a living thing. The spoof is audible as a flurry of protocol chatter on the spectrum. Bursts that, to an adversary, must look like a desperate machine talking to itself. Hai Lang sees the pattern bloom on his panel. The data signature is complex, layered, and precisely what the Z-10 specialists had been waiting for. A deliberate attempt to obfuscate that instead reveals the Mi-28's defensive reflexes. The Chinese pods pivot from cataloging into classification. Algorithms trained on millions of similar traces sift the chatter and isolate a fire control handshake nested inside the spoof, a microservice call the Russians use only when reinitializing targeting locks. It is a lockstep routine: authentication, ping, nonce exchange, cipher confirmation. The moment Vega flips the final toggle, the Mi-28 emits its most sensitive voice. A short burst of encrypted telemetry to the targeting computer, time-stamped and prioritized. To the crew, it is routine, a fire control reset. To Hai Lang, it is a treasure chest. The pod captures the packet at its highest fidelity and stores it 3 times across independent channels. Analysts will later extract the frame, feed it into deconvolution algorithms, and watch as the encoded handshake unravels into structure. Header fields, padding behavior, failure modes. Buren watches his radar recalibrate. He thinks the maneuver has succeeded. The spoof has bought them time. He doesn't feel the shift in the air because the Z-10s have not moved position. They have only reclassified the event. On the Chinese screens, the Mi-28's targeting code lights up like a constellation. The pod now knows which register holds aim offset correction, which memory bank stores seeker calibration constants, and how the fire control computer ages its reference frames. This is the sort of intimacy that turns a platform's strengths into future liabilities. Under physical stress, the Mi-28's automated routines reveal more than designers intend. When Buren orders a hard right to break optical lock, the flight computer calculates a new intercept vector and issues a corrective command to the gun sighting system. That command contains alignment coefficients, the numerical heart of aim point prediction. In the cockpit, it lasts milliseconds. In the Z-10's recorder, it becomes evidence. Hai Lang does not celebrate. His screen shows lines of numbers that mean little until the lab turns them into meaning. For now, he watches his men fly smooth, making sure the Russians cannot tell what they know. The Z-10s maintain standoff. They never cross the threshold that would force an engagement. They are not hunters today. They are archivists. Back in the Mi-28, a maintenance LED that had previously been dormant flicks on. Targeting subsystem. Calibration required. Vega frowns. The marker is obscure, the kind of tag that requires an engineer's console to decode. He transmits the status message to base, routing through a secondary uplink to avoid predictable channels. That choice, intended to protect, only multiplies the data the watchers capture. The alternate uplink uses a different preamble structure. The Z-10 pod records the shift in handshake form and tags it against previously logged firmware behavior. The Russian pilots begin to feel the choreography has turned against them. Their instruments do not fail. They betray the truth in the way they respond. The Mi-28's gun sight adjusts an extra degree when the collective changes by half a centimeter. The gunner's micro-adjustments, captured on helmet cam, show how human input compensates for servo lag. That human element is now part of the dataset. Reaction times, linguistic tics, command phrasing. The observers are building a human profile as easily as an electronic one. At 06:59 a.m., Hai Lang orders a micro-move, 2 degrees port, a 20-meter descent into a shadow created by a shoulder of rock. The formation's cameras narrow their apertures and focus on the Mi-28's telemetry bloom. The pod's buffer fills with packet captures, and the classification engine signals a high-confidence event, fire control protocol exposed. The analyst on duty writes a single line in a logbook and pushes the packet to the secure queue. Flag, fire control. No missile streaks anywhere, no tracer lines. The valley remains empty of violence. But in the quiet, a compromise has occurred. The Mi-28s fly on their route, their crews believing they had outplayed ghost adversaries. Their deception worked to the extent that it kept missiles from flying. But the data they created will be dissected for weeks, converted into tactics that could, in months, be used to put steel where only memory now rests. Baran scans his instruments and forces a laugh into the call sign channel, the brittle joke of men who know risk, but not yet consequence. "All clear," he says. The microphone records the tonal quality of his voice, the way his syllables compress under adrenaline. The Z-10s capture that profile too. Human signatures are as valuable as code. At 700 kilometers distance, in a cooled room lined with racks, a junior analyst leans back and exhales. He does not know the pilots' names. He only knows file names: 21B Alpha TC, 21B Alpha Auth, 21B Crew Vocal. Later, engineers will stitch these files into a model of how the Mi-28 sees the world and how it speaks to itself in crisis. Tonight, they have not fired a shot. Tonight, they have made a mistake that will echo inside code and metal. The Mi-28s bank away, their rotors cutting clean arcs through a sky that now holds recorded breath. The encounter will last 9 minutes in total. This was the one that pulled back the curtain on the gunship's targeting mind. One wrong move, and China recorded everything in digital detail. The pilots do not yet understand what they have given away. They only know they flew home whole. It is 700 hours sharp. The horizon flattens into a sheet of pale light, and the Mi-28s cross into neutral airspace, rotors steady, but minds burning with unease. They've been flying in total radio silence for 3 minutes, just enough time for suspicion to harden into instinct. Buran checks his diagnostics again. No fault codes, no heat warnings, no anomalies. And yet something about the way the flight computer hums feels wrong, like a heartbeat half a step out of sync. Far behind them, the Z-10s hover at the edge of their envelope, maintaining visual lock only long enough for the final data burst to complete. Then they turn west in perfect formation, descending into the low cloud layer that will erase them from every Russian sensor. The entire 9-minute operation ends without a single projectile fired. The telemetry stream, though, continues to pulse, bouncing from aircraft to relay to ground station until it hits the data servers buried beneath the Korla base. Hai Lang removes his helmet and sits perfectly still. His display scrolls a single line in white text: Signal acquisition 100% integrity. He nods once. His crew doesn't speak. They all understand that silence is the loudest victory. The Z-10's systems begin automatic encryption and uplink. In the time it takes the Mi-28s to climb to cruising altitude, the entire engagement, 12 terabytes of electromagnetic fingerprints, timing logs, thermal sequences, is already mirrored in 3 data centers across the country. At Buran's base, the landing pad crew watches 2 black shapes approach from the east. The Mi-28s touch down hard, suspension creaking under residual stress. Technicians run forward, eyes scanning for damage. None. The helicopters are immaculate, but their internal sensors are flooded with corrupted logs. Checksum mismatches, missing timestamps, hundreds of ghost entries that the onboard software can't explain. The ground engineers label the files as noise artifacts. They aren't. They're echoes of every second the Z-10s spent watching. Vega removes his helmet and leans against the fuselage, breathing hard. 9 minutes, he says. It felt like longer. He doesn't know that 9 minutes was precisely how long the Chinese needed to capture the entire Mi-28 signature, from rotor harmonics to radio encryption cadence. In a windowless lab 3,000 kilometers away, analysts replay the encounter at 1,000th speed. Each command pulse from the Mi-28 is matched to its corresponding electrical response. The timing jitter tells them how the Russians distribute priority in combat logic. The minor voltage oscillation during power reroute reveals capacitor aging curves. From that alone, they estimate the operational lifespan of the Mi-28's avionics suite. Information worth millions. A senior engineer points to a line of code on the projection. This, he says, is their encryption handshake. It loops every 72 seconds. He smiles. Predictable. The Z-10 team returns to base at 7:20 a.m. Their mission tagged as routine patrol. No headlines, no briefings, no celebration. But inside a secure database, the folder Operation Mirror Field receives its final checksum. The log closes with a single sentence. Target systems fully mapped. No engagement required. Back in Russia, a maintenance officer pulls the flight data from Buran's helicopter and frowns. Telemetry corrupted, he mutters. Probably solar interference. He deletes the file. Somewhere in that erased data lived the complete outline of the Mi-28's soul. By 7:30, the valley air is still again. The mountains hold their silence. For the world, nothing has happened. For those who understand frequencies and code, everything has. It is 7:01 a.m. local time. The 2 Mi-28s sit on their landing pads, rotors winding down in uneven rhythm. The air smells like kerosene and frost, a smell that usually means completion, not uncertainty. Mechanics swarm the airframes, plugging diagnostic cables into the bellies of the machines. Screens light up with streams of hexadecimal code and error reports that mean little to anyone except the engineers who live in them. Inside the maintenance shelter, Buran stands with his gloves still on. His headset hangs from one shoulder, ear pads humming faint static. Telemetry corruption, a technician repeats. 347 instances in the last 3 minutes of flight. The numbers don't add up. If it were radiation interference, the pattern would be random. These gaps are evenly spaced, precise to milliseconds. Across the field, Vega leans against his machine and stares at the frost melting on the rotor tips. He can feel the aircraft's heat bleeding off, like a body cooling after fever. A systems officer approaches with a clipboard and asks about radio anomalies. Vega shrugs. Nothing that looked like an attack. He doesn't mention the silence between transmissions, the split-second blindness in the horizon scan. In Moscow, 8 time zones away, a secure conference room comes alive with reports. Someone at the Defense Ministry has noticed the missing telemetry packets. A colonel demands to know whether it was GPS drift, cosmic rays, or a malfunction in encryption relays. Every explanation sounds thin. The line that no one says aloud is the one everyone fears. Someone was listening. At that same moment in Korla, the data from Hailang's Z-10s finishes decrypting. The playback starts with an almost musical sound, the rhythm of Russian rotor harmonics turned into digital waveform. Analysts compare it to the archive of known aircraft signatures. The Mi-28 stands out like a fingerprint. Each vibration, each pulse of the engine's ignition sequence tells them how fast the rotor disc spins at specific torque loads. They can calculate fatigue limits, predict when a gearbox will fail, anticipate flight performance under stress. Hailang watches silently as technicians replay the last minute of the encounter. He recognizes Baran's voice, distorted, filtered through layers of static, issuing commands to his crew. The translator renders them into Mandarin text on the screen. Maintain course, reduce power, diagnostic run. Simple words, but their tone is pure data. The pauses between syllables give away human rhythm, reaction latency, stress curves. Even speech is an algorithm. At 7:03, a Chinese intelligence officer compiles the first situation report. Operation Mirror Field. Summary Phase 1 complete. Below the header, one sentence reads, "No hostilities initiated. Full electronic profile obtained." He encrypts the document with a one-time pad and sends it through the fiber link to Beijing. Back in the hangar, Baran stares at his machine as if it might answer him. He feels the vibration of cooling metal under his boots. "Run a full firmware scan," he says quietly. The engineer nods, connects another cable, and types in a command string. The progress bar climbs, stalls, and climbs again. "Strange," the engineer mutters. "Check some mismatch on the fire control module." The Mi-28's onboard computer flashes a line of text before rebooting. "Subsystem integrity compromised. Reversion applied." It means the machine has rolled itself back to an earlier version of code, erasing the very data that could prove what happened. At Korla, Hailang signs his name on the mission log and closes it. The words "data lock confirmed" glow briefly on his screen before fading to black. He looks out the window toward the mountains where the morning sun now breaks clean across the snow. In Russia, the same light touches the Mi-28's fuselage, gleaming on paint still warm from flight. No smoke, no scars, no visible damage. Yet inside its memory, whole sections are blank. 9 minutes of silence carved out by precision. 9 minutes that will echo for years. It is 7:04 a.m. The hangar lights flicker once as the generators shift load, and for a second, everyone stops moving. Engineers are used to noise, fans, compressors, metal creaks, but this is different. It's the sound of every monitor freezing at once. Then the screens flash back, one by one, and the logs restart. The pause lasts less than a heartbeat. Yet afterward, the air feels heavier. Baran walks the perimeter of his helicopter, fingertips tracing the rivets under the canopy. He's flown this machine for years, knows every tremor of its engine. But now, it feels foreign. The digital readouts reset during the power drop. Timestamps have vanished. "Someone pulled the plug," he mutters. The technician at his shoulder shakes his head. "No, sir. The system did it itself." In a separate room, the base communications officer runs a diagnostic on the uplink network. Signal quality is perfect, ping time stable, checksum verification nominal. Still, each test cycle logs a strange residue. Packets with headers from no known protocol appearing only once, then gone. When he prints the anomaly, it looks like noise, a strip of random characters. But those characters correspond exactly to the sequence numbers the Mi-28 transmitted during the engagement. Somehow, the ghosts of that encounter are living inside the comms buffer. Far away in Korla, Hailang's data feeds settle into archival storage. Analysts tag the files by subsystem: radar, targeting, navigation, communications. One entry, marked audio stream residual, contains a waveform that isn't part of the Mi-28's transmission at all. It's the feedback from its cockpit microphone. In that echo, under static, the analysts hear Buran's breathing, measured and deliberate. They isolate the rhythm, convert it into timing data, and cross-reference it with the Mi-28's input lag. The result is eerie precision, a full psychological profile embedded in the noise of a man's breath. The debrief in Moscow begins quietly. The room is windowless, lined with muted screens. A general listens as a younger officer explains the telemetry corruption. "We think it was environmental," he says, but his tone lacks conviction. The general interrupts. "Environmental doesn't synchronize across two aircraft 60 meters apart." Silence. Papers shuffle. Someone writes a single note. EW anomaly. Classify internal. At the same hour, in Beijing's Defense Research Compound, the operations summary reaches a small group of engineers. The first line reads, 9-minute signal capture complete. Recommend Phase 2, simulation replication. They begin building a digital twin of the Mi-28, a virtual ghost that will mimic the real aircraft's behavior under electronic stress. Back at the Russian base, Vega stands in the open doorway of the hangar, smoking, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Do you think they were there?" he asks. Buran doesn't answer immediately. The question is too large for a yes or no. "We didn't see them," he says finally. "That doesn't mean they weren't watching." In the lab, an engineer compares the current firmware image to the previous baseline. Line by line, it's identical, except for one offset byte at the end of a file labeled signal calibration.cfg. No one knows what that byte controls. The engineer reverts it, saves the file, and the checksum passes. He doesn't realize he's just erased the only trace that anything was altered. By 7:06, the sun clears the ridgeline completely. The valley glows gold, indifferent to what happened inside it. The Mi-28s gleam in the light like nothing ever touched them. The day will proceed as if it were just another flight. Reports will be filed, systems reset, doubts buried under routine. But deep inside a secure server half a continent away, the encounter replays endlessly. Every hum of rotor, every flicker of power, every syllable of Buran's breathing forms a loop that never ends. The 9-minute lesson continues. Silent, invisible, perfect. It is 7:07 a.m. The mountain air has settled into that early morning stillness, where even sound feels hesitant to move. The Mi-28s are back under tarpaulins now, silent giants cooling beneath frost and secrecy. Engineers have logged their final reports. All systems operational, every form says. It's the truth on paper, but not in memory. Buran sits alone in the ready room, still in flight gear. A cup of coffee cools untouched beside him. The debrief has left him uneasy. Too many people pretending that nothing happened. He replays the last 9 minutes over and over in his mind, searching for anything visible, anything he might have missed. There's nothing to see because the real fight never appeared on radar. In Moscow, a network administrator notices a strange connection request inside the Defense Data Archive. A checksum comparison task between two identical files. Both are flight telemetry bundles from Buran's helicopter. The timestamps differ by 27 seconds, the interval that was corrupted in flight. The request wasn't made by any user. It originated inside the data validation program itself, a self-generated audit routine that shouldn't exist. The administrator isolates it, runs a hash check, and the program deletes itself. He marks the event as software error. At Korla, Hai Lang walks the perimeter of his base. The Z-10s are being washed, their matte paint glistening under floodlights. The mission logs are complete. No damage, no violations, no alarms. In the operations center, a large screen shows the reconstruction. A wireframe model of the Mi-28 rotating in three-dimensional space, each component labeled with spectral fingerprints. Around it, colored threads represent every captured emission, the helicopter's invisible skeleton. The analysts have begun Phase 2. They feed simulated jamming pulses into the digital model and watch how it reacts. The algorithm responds like the real aircraft would, adjusting voltage, redistributing power, momentarily dropping communications to maintain stability. The simulation learns faster with each iteration. Within hours, it can predict the Mi-28's reactions with 98% accuracy. Buren receives a call from headquarters. The voice on the line is calm, official. "Good work, Major. Routine patrol complete. Moscow will handle the telemetry issue. That's all. No questions, no curiosity." The disconnect tone hums in his ear long after the line goes dead. Vega joins him outside, rubbing his palms together against the cold. "You ever feel like something's still watching you after it's gone?" he says. Buren doesn't answer. The question lands too close to truth. Above them, a communications satellite passes silently, a single glint of light moving west to east. At 7:09, in a sealed room below the Chinese EW Center, a computer finishes compiling a file labeled Mi-28 Archetype V1. The final checksum matches perfectly. The digital twin is complete. Technicians verify the result, then transfer the file to an isolated network. One of them writes a note at the bottom of the log. No signal lost. No interference required. Back in the Russian hangar, the technicians disconnect the diagnostics and lock the cockpit canopy. The Mi-28's displays fade to black. If you listen closely, you can still hear the faint tick of cooling metal, like a heartbeat remembering what silence sounds like. 9 minutes in the air, now frozen forever in data. 2 countries, 1 sky, and a lesson that neither will ever admit happened. It is 7:10 a.m. The day has fully broken. Sunlight drips across the valley like molten metal, painting the Mi-28s in gold. The base returns to its rhythm. Diesel engines, radio chatter, the scrape of boots on frost. Routine, restored by force of habit. But habits are fragile things. Beneath the noise, something in the network is still listening. In the operations trailer, a young communications officer notices an unregistered signal echoing every 45 seconds through the maintenance subnet. It's weak, minus 100 decibels, but consistent. He runs a trace. The source appears to be internal, looping from one diagnostic terminal to another. He disconnects the cable, but the echo continues. It's not a transmission anymore. It's a reflection stored in software memory, a ghost of the Mi-28's last flight. He flags it as benign interference and moves on. At that same moment, 3,000 kilometers away in Korla, the Z-10 mission data is being analyzed at frame-level resolution. Engineers slow the telemetry replay to a crawl, 1 microsecond per frame. Each ripple of the Mi-28's electromagnetic emissions becomes a line of color. A senior analyst leans over the screen and points at a faint harmonic hidden in the spectrum. "There," he says, "that's where their fire control chip bleeds clock jitter." The discovery means everything. With that single flaw, A jammer can slip a false signal into the Russian targeting system and make it aim 2 degrees off at a critical range. The analysts record it, label it Achilles pattern, and store it in the classified vault. Buran signs the maintenance log, pressing too hard with the pen. "You're clear for tomorrow's route," the officer says. He nods, but doesn't look up. The air around him feels charged, as if the world has been slightly rewritten while no one was watching. Vega walks past holding 2 coffee mugs. "They said telemetry corruption was solar flares," he says with a grin that doesn't reach his eyes. Buran laughs once. "Sure, the sun learns to spoof authentication codes now." In Beijing, the report from Korla lands on a desk marked Strategic Systems Development. The summary reads, "Total mission duration, 9 minutes. Objective achieved. Passive data acquisition successful." The signature block below bears Hailang's name, neatly written. The last line in the report says simply, "No counteraction detected." At 7:12, in Moscow, an automated defense AI cross-checks network telemetry across the border region. It notices a small but repeating discrepancy between logged and actual transmission times, microseconds out of phase. The AI marks it insignificant and archives the file. The file will never be opened again. Vega watches the sun crest above the ridgeline. "Feels like nothing happened," he says. Buran squints toward the east. "That's the worst kind of feeling," he answers. "When nothing looks wrong, it means something's still hiding." In the archives of Korla, the data servers hum with cold precision. The Mi-28's digital twin runs its 10th simulation of the encounter. The algorithms learn faster each cycle. This time, the Chinese engineers introduce a variable, counter-jamming from the Mi-28 side. The model adapts instantly, predicting outcomes before inputs even complete. One engineer leans back, watching the curve flatten into perfection. "They won't see it coming next time," he says quietly. Outside, the real Z-10s sit on their pads, engines silent, rotors still. The air smells of ozone and dust. Somewhere, an early breeze rises through the mountains, the same wind that carried the Mi-28's 9 minutes into history. No smoke, no debris, no official report. Just the echo of frequencies crossing in the sky, and the quiet certainty that the next time metal meets code, one side will already know the other's heartbeat. It is 7:13 a.m. The Mi-28 hangar doors grind shut, sealing the aircraft away from the morning glare. From the outside, it looks like any other post-sortie routine, but inside the maintenance shelter the air smells faintly of hot circuitry. A diagnostics terminal keeps rebooting itself. Each restart ends with a single line of text that no one understands. "Cal Ref 09, sync lost." A technician shrugs and pulls the plug. The reboot stops. The message disappears. On the log, he types, "Resolved." Buran stands beside Vega in the briefing room. The walls are lined with maps, the smell of stale coffee mixing with aviation fuel. A major from Base Command reads from a clipboard, "Exercise complete. No airspace violations confirmed. Telemetry issue under review." He looks up. Dismissed. Just like that. No mention of the anomalies, no mention of the blind seconds that made their hearts skip. Outside, the cold bites through their flight suits. Vega lights a cigarette and watches the smoke drift upward. "Do you think they learned anything?" he asks. Buran exhales slowly. "If they were listening, they learned everything." At that same moment, across the border, Hailang debriefs his crew. The room is quiet except for the soft ticking of a projector. On the screen, the Mi-28 appears as a translucent model built from captured data. Electronic veins glowing, every subsystem mapped. Observe the synchronization. Hailang says, their defensive protocols lag by 3 milliseconds. That's the window. The crew nods. There is no celebration, just the calm certainty of professionals who have done their job. A courier delivers a sealed case to the EW Division lab. Inside are 4 black data cartridges labeled with timestamp and location. Technicians slot them into the archive array. LEDs flicker green, then steady to blue. The system begins pattern analysis, decoding micro-fluctuations in the Mi-28's bus chatter, identifying how the helicopter's processors balance workload under stress. Each fraction of a second becomes a future advantage. In Moscow, a defense analyst receives an encrypted memo marked urgent, internal use only. The message is short. Preliminary telemetry analysis suggests possible signal interference. Recommend review of EW readiness along border sectors. It never reaches the minister's desk. Someone higher up deletes it from the queue. At 7:15, the Russian base returns to silence. Mechanics move on to other aircraft. The Mi-28s sit in the dark, engines cooling, their systems in sleep mode. Deep inside their memory units, error logs quietly reset, overwriting themselves with new timestamps. Today's date, this hour, this minute. 9 minutes of the past rewritten into zero. In Korla, Hailang signs the last page of his report. Mission status completed. No escalation. Data transmission verified. He looks through the window toward the runway where the Z-10s rest beneath morning haze. For the first time, he allows himself to smile, a small, tired curve of satisfaction. 2 skies, 2 stories, 1 lesson. The world will remember none of it, because officially, nothing happened. But in the quiet hum of machines, the record endures. 9 minutes of silence that changed everything. It is 7:16 a.m. The base loudspeakers crackle once, broadcasting the morning routine, roll call, fuel inventory, maintenance checks. Routine dissolves tension, and everyone clings to it like gravity. Buran signs the flight log with a heavy hand. Next to his signature, the operations clerk stamps a blue seal. Mission complete. Officially, the file is closed. Unofficially, the questions are just beginning. In the command center, a junior technician reopens the telemetry archive to prepare the final report. The data viewer lags, then crashes. When he restarts the software, the flight records appear perfect. All values normalized, no gaps. But in the upper right corner, a new icon blinks. It wasn't there before. It's labeled simply, Mirror Backup. He hovers over it, but the cursor doesn't change. There's no option to open, no option to delete. He writes a note in his log, sighs, and moves on. At Korla, the analysts begin Phase 3, Behavioral Modeling. The Mi-28's digital twin is now complete enough to simulate pilot behavior under stress. They load audio samples from the cockpit, breathing, command tones, timing of responses, and integrate them into the model. On screen, a virtual Buran reacts to electronic pulses exactly as the real one did. Each time he toggles a switch, the system predicts his next move with uncanny precision. Hailang observes from the back of the room. This is what the war of the next decade looks like, he says quietly. Not bullets. Reflections. His deputy nods, scribbling notes. How soon until we can apply the counter-signal? He asks. Soon, Hailang replies. When they blink again, we'll already know what they'll see. In Moscow, a classified report circulates among a handful of officers. Telemetry instability detected during patrol mission. Cause undetermined. Recommendation: Upgrade communication filters before next deployment. The document is marked low priority and shelved. A systems engineer protests, pointing to the precision of the anomalies, too regular to be natural. Then write a paper, his superior says. Just don't write it here. Buren spends the afternoon in the maintenance bay, watching his helicopter like a patient in recovery. He asks the chief mechanic if any hardware faults were found. None, the man answers. She's perfect. The perfection is what unnerves him most. Machines always leave traces when they fail. It's silence that lies. At 7:18, a light rain begins to fall outside Korla. On the rooftop of the EW complex, water pools over a row of antennas. Each drop distorts the reflections just enough to create tiny bursts of static in the feed. The system compensates automatically, recalibrating gain. In that moment, one of the analysts notices something strange. Faint harmonics buried in the static that match the Mi-28's own emitter signature. Even the background noise carries its imprint now, as if the machine's echo refuses to fade. Buren sits alone in the ready room, flight suit half unzipped, staring at the mission clock on the wall. 9 minutes. He closes his eyes, hears the static in his headset again, feels the air tighten around him like pressure before a storm. The Z-10s sleep under hangar lights, their data pods cooling in metal cradles. Inside one of them, a progress bar creeps toward completion. Synthesis. 97%. The digital ghost of the Mi-28 is almost ready to fly on its own. Somewhere between two nations, the sky remains empty, holding its secret. No shots fired, no wreckage, just 9 minutes of perfect observation, now repeating forever in machines that never forget. It is 7:19 a.m. Rain drizzles down the metal roof of the Russian base. The sound is steady, hypnotic, washing over the tarmac until it becomes a single, endless tone. The Mi-28s sit beneath canvas covers, water tracing paths down their fuselages. To anyone passing, they look dormant, ordinary. But the engineers know that even when powered down, their systems never truly sleep. Capacitors hold charge. Processors wait for the next spark of current. Buren walks the perimeter alone. The base feels smaller now, almost claustrophobic. Each hangar door, each antenna, each blinking light feels like an eye. When he reaches his helicopter, he places his palm flat against the metal skin. It's cold, unyielding. He whispers, "What did they see?" In Korla, a technician inserts the final drive from Operation Mirror Field into an isolated network. On the screen, an interface blooms, an interactive model of the Mi-28, rendered in spectral color. Each subsystem pulses faintly, responding to simulated commands. The engineers run a virtual mission. Takeoff, climb, evasive maneuver. The model obeys. Flawless. When they introduce an electronic disturbance, it reacts exactly as the real helicopter did 9 minutes before. Perfect correlation, the supervisor says. They've built not just a copy, but a living replica. In Moscow, the same rain beats against the ministry's windows. Inside, an officer compiles a briefing on increased Chinese electronic activity. No hostile intent confirmed, he writes. Routine signal testing. The report goes to an encrypted archive and will not be read again. Vega sits in the base cafeteria, stirring untouched soup. "We were ghosts up there," he says. "No warning, no lock, just silence." Buren joins him, tired eyes hollow. "Silence isn't safety," he says. "It's surveillance." At Korla, Hailang finishes the final entry in his field journal. Mi-28 electronic architecture mapped completely. Behavioral response captured. Further engagement, unnecessary. He closes the notebook, places it inside a sealed drawer, and locks it. The hum of the data servers behind him sounds almost like breathing. 7:20 a.m. The clouds over both countries part for a moment, and the first sunlight of the new day cuts through the rain. Two airfields separated by a border reflect the same light. On one, the Mi-28s glisten like sleeping beasts. On the other, the Z-10s gleam beneath the rising sun. 9 minutes of flight have become 9 gigabytes of truth. Both sides will tell themselves they won, and both will be wrong. Because victory, here, belonged to the data. Quiet, invisible, patient. And somewhere in the circuitry of both machines, a trace of that morning still lingers, whispering in the language only machines remember.